Chapter 2. Quick, into the water, Tsunami ordered. It was closer than the trees and would hide them just as well. No way, said Glory. She sank to the ground, spreading her wings and shifted color. Her scales flowed into the rocky, sandy pattern below her until she was impossible to see, especially from the air. It happened so fast, Tsunami nearly lost track of where she was. Glory was getting better at that trick. Fine, come on, Sunny. Tsunami reached for the little sand wing. I'd rather not, Sunny squeaked. I can make it to the trees. I'll fly really fast. Tsunami. She jumped off Clay's back and flapped after Starflight. Tsunami stamped her foot, spraying ocean water across the sand. Glory made a muffled, grumpy noise. It'll be safer in the sea, Tsunami huffed. She cast a worried look at the sky. The specks were getting closer, fast. Maybe faster than Sunny could hide, but it was too late to catch her now. Tsunami turned and dove into the ocean. Clay was already burrowing into this shallow mud shelf, displacing startled flatfish and sending up clouds of minnows. The mudwing didn't have a problem with water like the others did, since he could hold his breath for up to an hour. Tsunami breathed it in, and salt water rushed into her gills. He was surprised how sharp it felt, like inhaling smoke. It was nothing like the crystal clear water of the underground cave. What's more, the current kept trying to shove her back to the beach, then yank her out again. But she plowed forward and down, past Clay, beating her wings as the water got deeper. Schools of tiny purple fish whirled away from her like stars exploding. Over the edge of the sand shelf, the deeper ocean floor was covered in bundles of eelgrass. Waving dark green tendrils reached up to brush Tsunami's underbelly. She glanced up at the sky above her, still empty, and decided to risk surfacing. She had to be sure Sunny was safely hidden. The thunder of wing beats echoed in her ears as she poked her head out and turned toward the beach. The little sand wing was almost to safety. Tsunami could hear Starfly standing under the trees, reaching his front claws out to pull Sunny in. Overhead, an orange-shaped shot past, flying at full skywing speed, faster than any other tribe could fly. A red dragon flew close behind the first, followed by 3 more. Their enormous wings nearly blotted out the sun as they whooshed over the dragonettes' heads. Tsunami sank a little bit lower in the water, but it seemed like the patrol was going too fast to notice a lone sea wing in the ocean. Maybe these soldiers weren't hunting for the escaped prisoners. Then she saw the last dragon, sunset orange, flames flickering from his nose, with a jagged tear on the tip of his left wing. He flew slower than the others, bringing up the rear, and his head swung back and forth, his dark eyes searching the ground below them. Tsunami found herself holding her breath. The skywing snout swung toward the trees just as Sunny's tail whisked out of sight. He paused, beating his wings back to hover in the air for a moment. Was he staring at the trees? Had he seen Sunny? What if he called the others back? The patrol dragons were several wing beats away already, but one shout could bring them hurtling around at lightning speed. Sunny and Starflight were no match for 6 full-grown skywing soldiers. Actually, they were no match for 1 skywing soldier. The 2 of them together would probably have trouble fighting a sleepy bat. A curl of smoke rose from the skywing nose. and he opened his mouth. If there's any chance of saving her friends, Tsunami had to shut him up. She burst out of the water in a great leap, smashing her tail behind her for momentum. Her wings powered her up to ram right into the Skywing's underbelly. He coughed out a puff of fiery smoke and clutched his midsection, the breath knocked out of him. Tsunami had a few moments before he could recover enough to call for help. She ducked around him, slammed her tail into his head, and landed on his back as hard as she could. The Skywing nearly fell into the water, but he fought back up into the air. Tsunami kicked at his wings with her claws and slid back toward his tail, trying to drag him down with her weight. He was too big and strong for her to appear. Only taking him by surprise had given her a temporary advantage. She needed to get him into the ocean to even out the fight. The orange dragon snarled and twisted, shooting a blast of flames out of his snout, which barely missed her. Tsunami yanked him down into the water, but his massive wings beat harder and harder. It felt like a hurricane whistling around her ears. She could tell that he was gaining height, and in a moment he'd be strong enough to call the other soldiers back. "You're not getting my friends," Tsunami thought fiercely. She found the vulnerable spot on his tail and sank her teeth in. He convulsed with pain, nearly throwing her off, and shot another blast of fire under his wing at her. At first, Tsunami thought he had missed. Then she felt a searing trail of agony spreading across her neck. It was like someone was trying to saw through her scales with a scalding hot wire. She closed her eyes and clamped her jaw harder, determined to hang on. Those spots were starting to dance in her vision. Suddenly, the dragon lurched toward the sea. Tsunami's eyes flew open. Clay had flung himself between her and the dragon's snout, spreading his fireproof wings. His jaws clamped onto the Skywing's back, and the extra weight drove the soldier down toward the sea. Together, Clay and Tsunami dragged the Skywing into the ocean. He fought wildly the whole way, but his flames couldn't hurt Clay's fire-resistant scales, and his giant wings couldn't help him once he was underwater and cut off from breathing. As soon as they hit the water, Tsunami swam to the Skywing's head and held it below the surface until he stopped thrashing. She let go, and so did Clay. The dragon's body began to drift slowly toward the sea floor. A shudder ripped through Tsunami's scales. Him or me? This didn't feel right. Why couldn't she be ferocious and not care? She swam after the dragon and grabbed one of his wings, then looked back up at Clay. He met her eyes, and to her relief, she didn't even hesitate before swimming to the other wing. They dragged the Skywing up onto the beach. The current had carried them farther away than Tsunami had guessed, and it was painfully hard to swim back to shore, especially with a full-grown dragon weighing them down. She gritted her teeth, ignoring her exhaustion and the pain from the burn on her neck. She was a sea wing. This was supposed to be her element. She was the boss of the ocean, not the other way around. By the time they reached the beach, the rest of the patrol had vanished from sight. She wondered how long it would be before they noticed this one missing and came back to look for him. Tsunami collapsed onto the sand behind the Skywing. Clay peered into the dragon's snout and then started thumping his chest. "What is wrong with you?" Glory's voice snapped. The rain wing materialized from the sandy background, turning her scales a darker shade of brown so they could see her. She glared at Tsunami. Why did you do that? Oh, you're welcome, Tsunami said. Just saving your life, as usual. By attacking random dragons? And the moment they would have been gone. And what are you doing? She jabbed Clay in the side of one of her wings. Clay mumbled, fixing him. He kept thumping the Skywing's chest. What? Glory yelped. You can't let him live. She tried to grab one of Clay's forearms, but Tsunami shoved her away. We don't have to kill him. We'll tie him up and leave him here. Great. How about a trail of cow parts, too? And a map of where we're going? Perhaps we could set this part of the forest on fire, just to make sure everyone knows how to find us. Would you like me to spell out Dragonet's was here in giant rocks? Fine, here he is. You kill him. Glory looked down at the unconscious dragon and hesitated. I don't kill dragons who can't fight back. Why not? Tsunami said. Just splat some venom on his face and melt him, if it's that easy for you. Glory sank her claws into the sand, scowling. Bubbles of dark purple began spreading across her scales. Sunny and Starflight landed on the beach beside them. Sunny gave the Skywing a horrified look and remembered that she'd been trapped in another part of the palace during the arena fights. She had never seen her friends battle another dragon. Is he all right? Sunny asked Clay. Try this. Starflight offered, coming over to help. Clay shifted aside and they rolled the dragon onto his stomach. Why did you attack him? Sunny blurted at Tsunami. The little sandwing's harmless tail flicked back and forth anxiously. To save you, Tsunami said, stung. But he wasn't even doing anything. He was just flying by. All four of them were looking at Tsunami like she was the kind of dragon who hid under rocks and bit innocent passerby for fun. She arched her neck indignantly. I thought he saw you, she growled. He was about to call out to the others. I saw him open his mouth. So did I, said Glory. I'm pretty sure he was yawning. Pretty sure? Would you risk our lives on pretty sure? Was he yawning? Did I attack him for nothing? That can't be right. I saw danger and I reacted appropriately, didn't I? Maybe if you just stopped to think for a second, Starflight said. Or forever? Think like you? Think, worry, and never do anything? Tsunami cried. The Skywing suddenly coughed and seawater flooded out of his snout. Clay ruffled his wings with a pleased expression. Oh, wonderful. Our enemy will survive. Well done. We have to get out of here, Glory said. She took a step back and glanced at the sky where the other soldiers had disappeared. What do we do with him now, oh great leader? Tsunami had no idea. She glanced around frantically. Maybe if they could find some vines to tie him up with. There's a tree, Starflight said, jumping to his feet. In the forest? No way, Glory said. A tree? In the forest? Being sarcastic is not helping, Tsunami snapped at her. I mean, a fallen tree, Starflight said. We can use it. Glory, stay and guard him. Clay and Tsunami, come on, quick. Clay charged up the beach behind him. Tsunami paused for a moment. She didn't like leaving the soldier. even if he wasn't fully awake yet. She also didn't particularly like taking orders from Starflight. Go on, hurry, Sunny said, nudging her with one wing. Not far into the forest, a large tree had fallen, with the top of its branches brushing the sand. Clay and Tsunami shoved and rolled it onto the beach and dragged it back to the Skywing, while Starflight flapped around, squawking instructions. As if we need to be told how to move a tree. The soldier's eyes were blinking awake as they reached for him. He coughed and coughed again, lifting his head to peer at the dragonets. To peer groggily at the dragonets. So how does the tree help? Tsunami asked. We put it on top of him, so he'll be trapped in place. At least long enough for... At least long enough for us to get away. Tsunami hated to admit it, but it was a good idea. She helped Clay wrestle the tree over until it lay heavily across the orange dragon's back and wings. The Skywing tried to push himself up, but the tree kept him pinned to the sand. What if he's stuck here forever? Sunny worried. She reached over and brushed some sand off the Skywing's snout. He snorted a puff of smoke, and Clay pulled her back. We can't do that, Tsunami said. I wish you hadn't attacked him, Sunny said, ducking her head. Me too, Glory said. It wasn't the smartest move, Starflight agreed. Tsunami's gills flared and she spread her wings. You don't know that, she said. Maybe I saved us, again. He looked at Clay, but he only shrugged as if he wasn't sure. Thanks for the support, guys, Tsunami thought angrily, when all I'm trying to do is keep everyone safe. Don't worry, Sunny, Clay said, patting the little Sandwing's head. His friends will come looking for him eventually. Eventually or soon, Glory said. So like I said, let's seriously get out of here. Wait, the Skywing rasped. His voice was hoarse and deep. He wriggled, lashing his tail across the sand. Don't leave me like this. Starflight stepped into his line of sight, and gazed down at him. Remember, we could have killed you, he said. Remember that the dragonets of destiny were merciful. We want peace, not more death. We've come to save Pyfir. Oh, good grief, Tsunami said as Glory rolled her eyes. No more hanging out with Nightwings for you. I thought it sounded nice, Sunny said. Starflight shot her a grateful look. Sunny, don't encourage him. Carefully, Starflight draped a few large leaves over the dragon's head. He pointed to the forest and mouthed, just to be safe, like. That's mouthing. You just do the lip thing. Just say it, but don't do the voicing. Just don't say just to be safe. But just mouth it, okay? But Tsunami sighed, more flying in the wrong direction. She wanted to go home already. Home to the ocean and the sea wings and her royal parents. But she couldn't argue about it with the Skywing listening. And the others were already nodding. All of them were ready to follow, anxious, overly conscious, Starflight yet again. And none of them thought she'd done the right thing by attacking the Skywing, even though it was to save their stupid scales. As they lifted into the sky, She cast a longing look over her shoulder at the ocean. Soon, she thought, soon I'll be with my own dragons. Chapter 3. The Bay of 1,000 Scales was farther away than Tsunami had realized. She'd been studying the map of Pythagoras since she was tiny, but it was hard to fit that picture of the enormous world below her. She kept expecting to find neat little spirals of islands that would fit in the palm of her talons. Instead, she found herself flying over vast expanses of empty ocean, dotted here and there with a solitary outcropping of rock. After they took a long detour inland to convince the Skywing they'd gone in the opposite direction, they circled around south and flew out to sea. They managed to make it to a small rocky island shortly after nightfall, but according to Starflight, they were still a long way from the Bay of 1,000 Scales. He'd calculated the distance and their speed, and a boring lecture to explain it all. The rest of them fell halfway asleep into it, and he spent the next day sulking about that. Still, Tsunami had to admit, if only to herself, that it was useful having someone with all the geography and flight plans in his head. For a few days they stopped whenever they saw an island, ate a seagull or fish if they could catch any, and then flew on. Tsunami tried diving into the ocean several times and was disappointed to discover she couldn't swim as fast as she flew. The only good news was that the ocean water helped to heal the burn on her neck. It was 4 mornings later when Tsunami finally woke up on an island that was officially part of the 1,000 Scales. She started awake from a dream and when their cave had collapsed and was slowly crushing her to death, and discovered that Clay had rolled on top of her in the middle of the night. Grumbling, she wriggled out from under him and let his tail flop onto Starflight's head. The 5 dragonets were packed into a cavern halfway up a tall steep cliff. It was cramped and uncomfortable and smelled of seagull droppings. Clay had barely been able to scrunch his wings low enough to crawl inside. Why were they sleeping in this horrible spot instead of the nice white sandy beach below? She sat down in the cave entrance and glared at Starflight, which wasn't very satisfying because since everyone was still snoring away. Clay was stuffed against the back wall with Sunny between his front talons and Starflight curled up alongside. Even Glory had her tail draped over Clay's. Her scale glinted orange and gold in the light of the rising sun, with bursts of red when she shifted sleepily. Starflight had been acting so weird since the Nightwings gave him back. Suddenly, it seemed like he wanted to argue with Tsunami about everything. If she said, "Let's sleep on the beach, it'll be fun," he'd say, No, we have to sleep in a hidden cave. That'll be much safer. Safer, as if there was anything to worry about all the way here in the middle of the night. But everyone was still mad at her about attacking that soldier, so they all voted with Starflight. So she didn't like that development at all. She watched them sleep for a moment. It was so hard to lead effectively when everyone kept questioning you and complaining about everything. She only wanted what was best for them. Didn't they know that? She'd always figured she would fight 100 Skywings to protect them. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe my friends don't want my protection after all. Maybe they wanted Starflight to be their leader instead, even though he'd never risked one scale on his body for them. Tsunami glanced down at the sea, sparkling aquamarine below her. Somewhere in those blue-green depths was her family, her parents, her kingdom. Everything that should have been hers if the talents of peace hadn't stolen her away and ruined her life. Perhaps the problem with her friends that they were all from different tribes, all stubborn and muddled up instead of sensible like Sea Wings. Maybe her own kind would understand her better. Maybe they'd appreciate her instead of yelling at her. Well, she didn't have to sit here waiting for everyone to wake up. It wasn't like they'd be much help when it came to searching anyway. Tsunami stretched her wings, then tipped forward out of the cave opening. Wind whistled past her snout, tugging at her tail as she plummeted down the cliff. At the last moment, she snapped her wings open and sailed across the top of the water, skimming it with her claws. Joy tingled through her scales. She spun and dove into the water. The sea was warmer here and busy with underwater life. Her splash sent what seemed like thousands of fish scattering away, several of them disappearing into a pinkish-orange coral reef that curled out of the sand like a petrified forest. A blobby dark blue octopus goggled at her from the branches. Tsunami kept seeing flickers of bright yellow and silver at the edge of her vision as fish fled from her webbed claws. No welcoming committee of delighted seawings, though. No glowing jellyfish marking a path to Queen Coral's castle. No coveted bowing seahorses and bejeweled lobsters to lead the way. Not that she'd be picturing the homecoming scene from The Missing Princess or anything. Tsunami swam across the coral reef, peering at the creatures hiding in the necks and holes. A hideous thing she thought might be an eel stared back at her. Little orange and white fish nestled in the waving lavender anemones. She still wasn't used to swimming in the sea, and that frustrated her. Unexpected currents kept knocking her off balance. The salt water felt like it was scraping roughly against her gills. Well, where were her natural swimming instincts? Her world was supposed to make her fat, stronger, faster, tougher, not pathetic. She swam all the way to the next island, fighting the currents. More of the pinkish coral reef stretched across the sand here as well, dotted with waving green fans and lacy dark purple ferns. Her wings felt sore and tired, so she spread them wide and floated near the surface not far from the land. Something flashed below her in the shadows of the coral reef. Something very large. Tsunami had a brief vision of the large, toothy things that might live in the ocean, then dismissed it. If she was a shark, she would kill it and bring it back to others to eat, mainly so she could see the look on Starflight's face. She flicked her tail to swim closer. It was another seawing. A shiver rippled across her scales when she saw him, and part of her wanted to bolt right back to her friends. Don't be a smoke breather, she scolded herself. This is what you were hoping for, a dragon from your own tribe. She took a deep breath. The strange seawing had dark blue horns and sky blue scales, several shades paler than hers. He was paddling by the reef, shifting his talons and wings slightly to change course. his head turned alertly from side to side. Well, it wouldn't hurt to follow him for a while first, Nami told herself. She crept along the top of the reef, peering over the edge at her. Her claws caught on small gaps in the coral. She accidentally poked an indigent black lobster which came bustling out with its long whiskers bristling and pincers snapping. It took one look at her and hustled right back into hiding. Up here the reef was covered in a layer of green moss like Tsunami passed a couple of large sea turtles slowly swimming nearby. An enormous tentacled thing like a sea spider sat nibbling pizza manga. The tips of its 8 dark purple legs glowed orange yellow, and so did its eyes. The ceiling below stopped suddenly and glanced around. Tsunami flattened herself against the reef. Knobbly bits of limestone poked her underbelly. She peered through one of the holes at the other dragon. He spun slowly, staring into the ocean depths. Had he heard her? But he didn't look up. The dragon checked around him one more time, then lit up the stripes along his wings. Almost immediately, another dragon swam out of a cave in the coral reef. Nami thought, much less handsome. His green scales were perfectly nice, but she didn't care for the black spiral patterns on them. She'd never seen a pattern like that on a dragon before, and his face wasn't nearly as handsome as friendly looking at the first dragon, although perhaps that had something to do with the giant bruise swollen over his left eye. She wondered if they were guards switching patrol duty. If so, they were being quite strange about it. The two dragons floated in place, staring at each other for what seemed like an eternity. Occasionally, the stripes on one sea wing would light up, then the other. They moved their talons about as waving away fish, as even though no fish went anywhere near them. Then the spiral-marked dragon ducked back into the cave, and the blue dragon swam on. Some kind of sea wing patrol ritual? I guess I'll have to learn all that stuff in order to become queen. She lifted her wings to swim out after the first dragon, and a pair of yellow-striped fish wriggled out from under her and shot away. The sky blue dragon swam back the way he'd come, toward the stretch of open sea between this island and the one where Tsunami's friends were sleeping. Now or never, Tsunami thought. She'd rather meet this dragon than the other one, and she'd rather do it while she was alone. She could. That seemed easier than trying to explain herself to a whole bunch of dragons at once. She beat her wings to catch up, dove over the edge of the reef, and swam around in front of him. The sea wing started back in an eddy of ripples. His eyes were blue so dark they were almost back. Tsunami pointed out of the water so we can talk, she tried to signal. Hopefully he'd figure out what she meant. To her surprise, he whipped around and fled. His tail smacked a wave of water in her face. Well, that's unfriendly, she thought. He swam after him, swinging her tail to propel herself even faster. He glanced over his shoulder, saw her chasing him, and put on a burst of speed. Was he running? Why was he running away? And how was he so fast? Stop! She tried to yell through the water. I just want to talk. Of course that didn't work. He didn't even slow down. But then he twisted to look back at Tsunami, so he didn't see the whale that suddenly loomed out of the deep in front of him. Tsunami waved her talons and pointed. Watch out! She shouted in a cascade of bubbles. The seaweed smacked into the whale's side and careened backward. The whale was only slightly bigger than the dragon, with ridges all over his back and a flat, mild-mannered face. It made a weird squeaking groan and blinked at the ceiling in confusion. The dragon was still shaking his head, trying to reroute himself when Tsunami caught up, grabbed his tail, and pinned him to the sand. The whale blinked and swam on. Eddies rippled around the two dragons as it powered away through the water. Now what do I do? I have to get him to the surface to talk to him. Oh, sorry. If I already did this, I'm just going to start from this page. Talons about waving away fish, even though no fish went anywhere near them. Then the spiral-marked dragon ducked back into the cave, and the blue dragon swam on. Some kind of sea-wing patrol riddle? Tsunami wondered. I guess I'll have to learn all that stuff in order to become queen. She lifted her wings to swim after the first dragon, and a pair of yellow-striped fish wriggled out from under her and shot away. The sky-blue dragon swam back the way he'd come toward the stretch of open sea between this island and the one where Tsunami's friends are sleeping. Now or never, Tsunami thought. She'd rather meet this dragon than the other one. She'd rather do it while he was alone if she could. That seemed easier than trying to explain to herself to a whole bunch of dragons at once. She beat her wings, trying to catch up, and dove over the edge of the reef and swam around in front of him. The sea wings darted back in an eddy of ripples. His eyes were a blue so dark they were almost black. Tsunami pointed at the surface. Come on out of the water so we can talk. She tried to signal. Hopefully he'd figure out what she meant. To her surprise, he whipped around and fled. His tail smacked a wave of water in her face. Well, that's unfriendly, she thought. She swam after him, swinging her tail to propel herself even faster. He glanced back over his shoulder, saw her chasing him, and put on a burst of speed. Why was he running away? And how was he so fast? Stop! She tried to yell through the water. I just want to talk. Of course that didn't work. He didn't even slow down. Then he twisted to look at Tsunami, so he didn't see the whale that suddenly loomed out deep in front of him. Tsunami waved her talons and pointed. "Watch out!" she shouted in a cascade of bubbles. The ceiling smacked into the whale's side and careened backward. The whale was only slightly bigger than the dragon, with ridges all over its back and a flat, mild-mannered face. It made a weird squeaking groan and blinked at the ceiling in confusion. The dragon was still shaking his head, trying to reorient himself, when Tsunami caught up, grabbed his tail, and pinned him to the sand. The whale blinked again and swam on. Eddies rippled around the two dragons as it powered away through the water. "Now what do I do?" Tsunami thought. "I have to get him to the surface to talk to him, but if I let him go, he might try to escape again." She frowned down at the dragon and pointed at the surface again. Flashes of sunlight shimmered up above them like pieces of broken gold-white glass floating on the water. The other dragon tipped his head to one side. Luminescent stripes lit along his wings, flashing fast, then slow. "All right," Tsunami thought, "I can do that too. Maybe he's testing me." She lit up her own stripes, illuminating the ones on her snout, and the ones on her tail, and finally her wings. "See? My stripes flash too. I'm seeing. Well, let's go up and talk." Slowly she spread her wings and lifted up, prepared to grab him if he tried to bolt again. He scrambled upright but stayed with her, encouraged. Tsunami swam a little bit closer to the surface. He followed, but only for a bit before he stopped and looked around. His stripe flashed again, this time along the tail and the neck and tail. Impatiently, Tsunami lit up her stripes one more time, mirroring what he'd done. The sea wings flared open with a whoosh that scared the fish into the reef. He lunged toward Tsunami, fast as a minnow. His front talons reached for her. Tsunami roared, blasting him in the eyes with bubbles, and sliced her claws across his snout. She didn't know why he was attacking. Maybe he was a traitor sealing, or maybe he was guarding his territory or treasure. Perhaps he thought she was an intruder, although he wasn't much of his guard. If his first instinct was to run away, and his second was to attack for no reason. "He'll be sorry when he finds out who I am," she thought fiercely. She kicked his underbelly hard with her back legs. He coughed up a stream of bubbles and fell back. Tsunami spread her wings, snarled at him one more time, and shot to the surface. She burst into the air and kept beating her wings to rise into the sky. In the distance, she could see the cliffside cave and the worried faces of her friends poking out. An enormous splash sounded behind her. The other sea wing surged out of the ocean. His massive tail whacked the water twice as he lifted into the air, sending giant waves rushing in all directions. He looked even bigger out here in the air. His hooked claws gleamed sharply in the sunlight. His dark blue eyes were fixed on her wings. This is the first true citizen of her kingdom that she'd ever met, and he was coming to kill her.